lounging, son.
Welcome back to the Comic Lounge. My name is Ryan, and with me today we have a very awesome cartoonist with us to talk comics, Don Simpson, aka Dandy Don, Megaton Man, ton of indie stuff. Really excited to get into some of the stuff that you have on your drawing board as well, like we talked about right before I hit the record button. So welcome to the show.
Thank you, Ryan. Nice meeting you. I'm wearing the same thing. I did a live stream last week. I wore the same. This is Wayne State University hoodie. Here I am in my abode. And what do you want to talk about?
Well, let's start off. Every time I talk to somebody, it's first time I'm meeting them, talking to them. I always like to hear their story of how they got into comic books. How did your love for the medium start?
All right. Well, I've been drawing since I was 5, and I'm just didn't really stop. Somehow got the idea that I was not so much that I was good at it, but I just got a certain satisfaction from drawing. And other kids, I noticed in kindergarten that they were getting bored with drawing, or they were having frustrations. They couldn't get things to look the way they wanted to, and so they went off and played with blocks or something else. And I just took to it, and something about moving lines around on paper. And I wasn't drawing with any prodigal talent or anything. I just felt like I was doing the mom and dad and the dog and the tree and the house kind of drawings, but there was just something about this that I intuitively understood, and I thought I could keep getting better at it. So I just kept drawing. All through grade school and into my 10th summer, I started reading comic books, and I'd always kind of written and drawn my own stories. And comic books were around. This would have been the summer of 1972. And but just I latched onto Marvel's mostly. After a few DC comics, I was reading Marvel comics, and I had an epiphany. Me and my friend Brad Hogue hop over the fence a couple houses. He was into comics. And I remember being in his basement where we would read and collect and so forth. And I just said, I'm going to do this when I grow up. And I never looked back. And Brad outgrew comics after a couple summers, but I just kept with it. And I kept getting inspired. I outgrew superheroes toward the mid 70s. And I started getting into heavy metal and undergrounds around 76, 77 in high school. Graduated high school in 1980. I went to an art school in Detroit for advertising and commercial art, and that didn't appeal to me. The curriculum didn't appeal to me. I knew what I wanted to do, so I washed dishes in a restaurant for a couple of years, and I spent my money on art supplies, and I sent things off to heavy metal. And when I came up with Megaton Man, it took me about a year to do the first issue, and I sent it off to seem to recall 15 different publishers, and I got about 14 different rejection letters, but Kitchen Sink wanted to publish it. Then I was in the industry. Started to do the Megaton Man series, and after that I started freelancing for a bunch of different outfits. And but I've always concentrated on my own stuff, the stuff that I dreamt up in my own noggin, and could draw and letter and do the whole thing.
And Megaton Man, I mean, it's kind of like a satire on like superheroics, right? So what was the impetus behind that? Why was that the book that you shopped around to publishers?
I was influenced. I consider myself mostly a dramatic artist. I studied Vern Hogarth's Dynamic Anatomy. I grew up on Marvel Comics. I also read Mad Magazine and Peanuts and the newspaper strips. But what I found with humor, with a parody, is that I could combine all of my influences. I had so many conflicting influences. I had Kirby and Sinnott, John Romita, and Gil Kane, and Neil Adams, and Mobius, and Crumb, and all these things that I was trying to synthesize into my own style. It's just doing it for for a joke. I could indulge in all these extreme styles and not have to worry about the fact that they all conflicted and made a mess. So that was one real advantage of doing it as a parody, was I could just take advantage of the fact that I was still learning and still absorbing influences, and I could just get away with it until I figured out my own voice, which would kind of more or less happen toward the late 80s into the 90s. I started to just settle into my own style, and I wasn't so concerned about showing off that I knew all this stuff. I'd kind of established that by 91, and I'm gonna actually draw a little bit just for nervous energy here.
Fine
You
with
don't
me.
mind?
I don't mind, not at all.
So yeah, next question. So I'm
Yes.
working on, this is a page, this is a thing I'm posting on my Facebook page, you might have seen. I've decided to finish the 1963 annual on my own.
I mean, I'm very excited about it. I will get to that, but I kind of want to go. I want to stick chronologically, in terms of like
Sure.
where you're going, right? So we're talking about like the parody thing. During my research, I saw that in '85, Marvel and you had kind of a thing going, right, because of the parody of the Megatropolis Quartet. Can you kind of elaborate on that a little bit?
So I was parodying Silver Age comics, obviously, and I was more acquainted with Marvel, as I just said, than I was with DC. Of course, I grew up with the Adam West Batman show, and I knew all the origin stories for the DC characters, and of course the Superman movies were coming out in the 70s. So I knew all that stuff, but I was mostly doing a parody of Marvel. You could kind of think of Megaton Man as kind of Superman meets the Fantastic Four. So it was a crossover between DC and Marvel. We ended up annoying their lawyers, and we got a letter because we were using the Megatropolis Quartet every month. We got Kitchen Sink got his lawyer in Madison, Wisconsin, to write back, and we said that we argued that we were perfectly within our rights. It was a parody and so forth, and we never heard from them again. So it was kind of what I kind of regret about the whole incident was making an issue of it. I think that the thinking at the time was that we were going to gain sympathy from the marketplace. We would get fans would rush to our defense because the big guys were picking on us and they couldn't take a joke. So we decided to publicize it. We are under absolutely no obligation to publicize. It was just a letter, and they were particularly upset about we had sold a button where Megaton Man says, "I eat X-Men for breakfast." We're selling it for like 50 cents. We'd actually sold out of them, but in fact, when I met Kevin Eastman, he was wearing one of these buttons. Kevin created the Ninja
Turtles, right?
But so they thought we were unfairly trading on their trademarks. I think it would be very difficult for them to have proven that anybody was confused. I think at the time, a Marvel comic was like 60 cents, 65 cents. We were selling our Baxter comics for $2. So I don't think anybody could really be confused that they were picking up a Marvel comic by mistake. but we, our lawyer handled it and got back to them, and it's just been something of a nuisance to have to talk about it. But again, I think the thing that we were thinking at the time was that this was going to gain us sympathy, and I think it kind of backfired, because people were like, "Oh no, you're going to be canceled any time now," and so I'm not going to buy the book. So it really kind of hindered sales. And I was never going to do it forever anyway. So when I ended Megaton Man, I still run into fans today who say, it's too bad that Marvel sued you out of existence. It's like, no, that's not what happened. I'm still doing Megaton Man. Anytime I want, I can do Megaton Man. But so that's my spiel on that topic.
Okay. It's like I'm of a different generation of when I got into comic books, but I really, as I've gotten older and I go back and I buy issues, like the 80s, the black and white boom, the indie scene just really appeals to me. What was it like? I mean, like, you're talking about Kevin Eastman, who I know you did some Turtles work for.
Well, how old are you?
I'm 34. I'll be 35 in a week.
So what you were reading in the 90s or
90s? 90s is when I started.
So you were on that, were you the Image generation?
I mean,
Hot Comics?
I was five when Image launched. So I didn't discover them on the stands. That was in the dollar bins is where I discovered stuff like that.
Well, how did you, I'm curious, but how did you hear about my stuff? What did you go back and find stuff?
Well, to be honest, it was the Savage Dragon Megaton Man special is how I first discovered Megaton Man. And then of course I go back, like, for me, when I discover something, I always have to go back to the beginning. I don't like just jumping in the middle of something. I fall down rabbit holes quite frequently when I discover stuff that I like, discover cartoonists that I like. I always have to scoop up everything. So that's how I discovered your stuff. And eventually I get In Pictopia, which was just re-released through Fantagraphics, is that, deluxe size that you put out, which I kind of wanted to talk about. I know you did chat about it. You sent me Alan's script and stuff in the letter to you, and I was like, I thought his scripts were verbose. I mean, his comics are verbose. My God, those scripts are highly detailed. But
yeah, so now you've approached things as a historian, just you want to know where things. I was the same way. I was just a little earlier. I came in and I would read the late, Spider-Man 112, and I think Amazing Fantasy 15 was worth $15, and that was like way too much money for me when I was 10 years old.
Yeah.
Now it's what is it, $250,000? But I was lucky because at that time they were just starting to do the reprints, the origin of Marvel Comics, the Treasury editions. They were reprinting all the origin stories and so forth. But again, I've lost your question.
Oh, I think I was gonna more ask, like, what was that scene, kind of that indie scene, like back then? And I mean, obviously, like, the Turtles blows up, right? And then you see all these other kind of riffs on that with all these different anthropomorphic animals. But what was it like being in the indie scene? It's not in Marvel DC, like that's a completely different type of scene going on. But for you, being right smack in the middle of it,
I think a lot of it had to do with there was an awareness about creators' rights and copyright. The underground scene had kind of come and not exactly gone, but it had kind of faded back. There were people like Steve Gerber, who had created Howard the Duck. That was a very influential piece of work. But also it was just a famous incident of the fact that he had created this work for hire, and then they were turning it into a comic strip. They eventually turned it into a movie. It was the hottest thing in comics for a moment. You have to kind of explain this to people. But he had not negotiated any kind of contract. So there was this long dispute, et cetera, et cetera. And you also had Siegel and Schuster, the creator of Superman. They were in retirement age and they were kind of left out in the cold. And you had Neil Adams raising awareness that the creators of the industry were pretty destitute. And so there was a general awareness that, like, if you worked for Marvel and DC, you weren't going to own your material. The first cartoonist that I met was Keith Pollard, and first thing I asked him, he was drawing Spider-Man and the Fantastic Four at the time, and I couldn't imagine, that's the top of the profession right there. I couldn't imagine a higher aspiration. Now, I was in high school. This had been 77. First thing I asked him was, did you have any of your own characters? And he said, I got a whole closet full of characters, but I'm not going to give them away to Marvel. And this was like, what is this? And I had never, I don't think I even had earned a paycheck in my life at that point. I mowed lawns and got paid cash or something. I didn't know anything about contracts, work for hire. What does this mean? Like, why, if you're working for Marvel, wouldn't you want your characters published by them? And he said, oh no, they can just give it to somebody else and all this other stuff. So this was really kind of a wake-up call for, sorry if that's my notification, but, and I think, everybody in my generation who broke in a few years later, they were aware of this. We knew that, working for Marvel was a very fraught proposition. Alan Moore would later claim that he just discovered in 2019 that Jack Kirby had been screwed. I mean, this is ridiculous. Everybody knew this back in the 70s. But, and we had at least we had the underground model, and you had what was called, at the time, it was called ground level comics. You had Star Reach, Cerebus, ElfQuest. They were not undergrounds, they were not overgrounds, they were ground level, so-called. And that just became the alternative comics movement. But the idea was that you would create and you would own your own stuff. And Kitchen Sink, of course, was one of the publishers that had been an underground publisher. They were, this came naturally to them. They were dealing, with creators who owned their own material. They were reprinting Will Eisner at the time and so forth. And outfits like the Turtles were a little bit more rare. They printed up their own stuff on their own. But the idea was the same, was that you don't work for Marvel and DC. You don't sign away your rights. You hang on to your creations. And that's what really motivated people like me and Scott McCloud. Who else came into the business at that time? The Hernandez brothers just before me, and a whole bunch of people after us. But the idea was that if you did your toy deal, if you did your movie deal, that you didn't have a corporation in New York making all the profit and giving you zero or nothing. And it was there was also content questions. You could be more sexy, you could be more political, you could have your own opinions and not have to deal with editors in New York and so on. So I think all those kind of things were the issues that motivated us as a generation. Now, you just take it for granted that you can. The weird thing was when it started to turn and people were like doing independents, but they were doing independents so that they could get the attention of Marvel and DC, and then they could sell out.
Yeah.
But we were a little more political revolutionaries, I think. At least we fashioned ourselves in a romantic way, conceived of ourselves that way.
I think that's what, like, that's why that period just fascinates me so much, and that's why I try to learn as much as I can about it, whether through research or through talking to someone like yourself. And it's funny, you talk about how like creators would do that so they could work from Marvel or DC. I feel like it's the opposite now. I feel like they do stuff for Marvel and DC, and then they get that recognition, and then they just go turn that into their own creator own stuff, and they take that following with them. At least that's how I've kind of perceived it.
Well, I'm not anybody to ask about what's going on, but if you're talking about like somebody like Ed Piskor, who did the WYSIWYG, he did his independent stuff. Then he's doing the X-Men. I'm not sure that there's any boundaries at all anymore. I think it's all just kind of blurred. And for people like Ed, I don't think they see any difference between a deal with Fantagraphics and a deal with Marvel, or self-publishing or anything else. So it's just kept evolving. But there was an interesting point there, late 90s, where people were they were intentionally, let me just back up just a minute, and the other content thing was superheroes versus alternative subject matter, whatever that was. And that was a big thing coming from the underground in the 70s and 80s. Kitchen Sink Press, for example, didn't want to do a straight superhero because that would have put them in direct competition with Marvel. And Eclipse was the same way. Fantagraphics is still that way. But alternative publishers thought they would go after genres that weren't being served by Marvel and DC. And so there was a little bit of snobbery and just a little bit of competitiveness, but it wasn't until Image came along and they just said, we're just, we're independent, but we're just going to do superheroes. Suddenly that changed everything. People realized, well, why the heck aren't we doing superheroes? That's what we want to do. And that's what's going to sell the most, and that's what's going to get the attention of the fans, instead of doing science fiction or autobiographical stuff or whatever. So that kind of apprehension disappeared, and people just started doing whatever they felt like doing. But again, I just say now, it seems like I'm not sure that the print runs are that much bigger if you're Marvel and DC compared to what you could do with a Kickstarter on the internet or something.
Yeah,
I don't
definitely.
know if that answered your question or not, but
I wasn't so much a question. It's just like kind of like what I kind of perceive now in terms of like, and back then, like you said, like creators would do their indie book to kind of get into Marvel or DC, and that was like the end goal. I feel like the end goal maybe is blurred. It's not so much like Marvel and DC isn't the end all be all, is how I feel as a reader and a fan.
Just to explain to your viewers, my camera's up here and
I'm down there.
You're here.
Okay.
Just to show you what I'm doing. This is all mindless kind of rendering. I'm doing this rock guy, which is just, I'm using a Micron PN. It's but it's just noodling around. Yeah, somebody said to me last summer, they had been in, they'd published a couple things in the 90s. And then they got out of comics, they raised a family. Just recently, they contacted me because they wanted me to do a pinup for their comic. And they said, well, I'm back in comics. And I just, this was all text messages. And I wrote back, and I was in a philosophical frame of mind. And I just said, what does that mean in comics? I don't know what that means anymore. I just think the boundaries have kind of vanished without print. And then I have people on Facebook, and I post a page from my 1963 annual, and they say, "Is this real?" Meaning, are you going to publish this? And it's like, why do I have to publish it? You're looking at a picture. It's real. You're seeing it. It's in front of your eyes. Why don't you believe your eyes? But there's still an idea that it's got to be in print. It's kind of like I think comic book fans might be the only people in the world who believe that paper somehow represents permanence. You know, it's kind of like it's got to be on vinyl or it's not music. I don't know.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting time, but I don't know. I'm not somebody to tell you what's going on in the state of things.
Well, since you're talking about the 63rd annual, let's talk about your collaborations with Alan Moore. Let's talk about In Pictopia that just recently, over the past year, got republished. Obviously, his name is not attached to it. You've talked about it on your Facebook, but for anybody that is not familiar, maybe that's watching or listening to us right now, can you talk a little bit about that project and reprinting it and the story behind this, this back and forth of why he didn't want his name attached to it as well?
Well, let me just preface by saying when you create something, you own the copyright to something. The creator has to handle some business obligations. So I've created Megaton Man. I created Border Worlds, Wendy Whitebread under the Anton Dreck pseudonym. So I own a bunch of stuff. And if somebody wants to reprint it overseas, I've had a few, mostly Wendy Whitebread and Forbidden Frankenstein, but 15, 20 years ago, those were all reprinted in Europe. But you'll have to sign some paperwork. You have to do some business. And it's all, you might own the copyright, but you have to give permission. So as a result, you're kind of leasing out your copyright. So you have more control over your business decisions, but you still have to make business decisions. And I can tell you from experience, it's a little bit easier when it's just one person, right? So I write and draw and I do the lettering and I own it, it's just me and I can make whatever decisions I want to make. It doesn't affect anybody else. I don't have to deal with the writer or the inker or anybody else because I did it all. That's not the case with In Pictopia. And I've talked elsewhere about how that came about. It was a fundraiser for Fantagraphics for their legal defense. They were being sued, and they just approached me. They got a script from Alan Moore. In fact, I wasn't even the artist it was written for. But I got this over the transom. Hey, would you like to draw this? Sure, it'd be, because he wasn't as legendary as he is now, but he was already earning a name for himself on Swamp Thing, which I had read. I'm sure he'd done Watchmen by this point.
Mm-hmm.
And I'd met him at San Diego at one of the shows. So I was like, yeah, sure, I'd love to illustrate this script. And it was created and it was published, and we had Mike Gonzala help me pencil the animated scenes, which is like a page and a third out of 13 pages. Pete Poplaski penciled a bar room scene, which is about a page and a third. I inked everything. I lettered everything. You saw the script.
Yeah.
You can comment on that, and somehow miraculously that script survived because I didn't hold on to it. I sent it to Eric Vincent along with the artwork because he was doing the coloring. He did a brilliant job with the coloring. And I sent him the script because it is so dense with, it's like, a page of the script is like this much of it is description.
Yeah.
And then there's two sentences of dialogue. So Alan Moore is describing the atmosphere, the psychology. He's describing how we're going to trick the audience into thinking this and that. He goes on and on, puts all of his thoughts on paper. And I wanted Eric to read that, to understand, because he really added a lot in his coloring. He did some, and he did it all. This is all analog, so he did some kind of yellowed newspaper looking scenes, and there were some black and white scenes, or kind of monotone scenes, aged vintage scenes. We were dealing with newspaper comic strips and undergrounds and color superheroes. So the coloring was really important for modulating those emotions. So I wanted him to read the script. But I just sent him, this was before we could scan stuff, or I could have made a photocopy, but I didn't. I just sent him the script. I had drawn it. I was done with it. And somehow this script survived in the files of Anthony Smith, who was Eric's collaborator on another project for Kitchen Sink called Alien Fire. And we just came across this a couple of years ago. Right. I'd asked them, if they had anything for this project. I would have loved to have included that in this reprint. The problem is, again, you have to make some business decisions when you own something. We had never signed a contract. And then I had to deal with Alan. I would have to, people would come to me, publishers wanted to reprint it over the years. And they either had Alan's permission, or I'd have to contact him. I had to go through people to contact him. You couldn't talk directly to Alan Moore anymore. So it was really not the ideal situation. I felt as though I was the curator of this comic strip, and I was all by myself. And it wasn't so much that it was ever so profitable. It was just a 13-page strip. It was this dark allegory about the comic industry and about newspaper comics and the animation. And I just wanted to see it reprinted well. I was proud of it. I was proud of my work. More proud of just the way it turned out with all the collaboration and the coloring. I think it really needed to be in those original colors. So we did a couple of reprints, 2005 and 2015, that were just horrible. And I talk about those in the text. People promised me that they would do a good job, and then they just did whatever they wanted to do. I think they were, in the case of one of them, I think they were just really overconfident that they could pull this off. Well, I was pretty fed up with the whole thing. I was fed up having to go through intermediaries to talk to Alan Moore to get his permission. I was tired of these publishers who had Alan's permission and really didn't care what the artist had to say. Because it wasn't just me, there were other, these were always anthologies of Alan Moore stories. So there were other short stories that he had done, other cartoonists that they had obtained the rights to, and then they didn't listen to anybody. So I was just tired of this. And I talked about this before. I had an Italian monthly contacted me in 2019. They wanted to reprint In Pictopia yet again. And I just said, I'm through with this. If you get the permission, you want to scan an old comic book, you want to do a terrible job, go ahead. I'm not gonna scan my artwork or do anything. I'm just tired of it. And I mentioned this on Facebook, and of all people, Gary Groth messaged me and said, I'll print it. And so we were off and running with this thing. Of course, he had published it in the first place.
Right.
And we were lucky enough to get the original coloring. The whole thing was all set up. We even had the script. So I thought, well, this will be great. We'll do an archival thing. I haven't made any money from print comics. I mean, marginal amounts of money in the last 5-10 years. So I'm teaching college for a living. I'm not doing this for this is going to be a Watchmen miniseries and I'm going to get $1 million or something. I just want to get this thing printed correctly. And Gary says, well, you got to talk to this crazy motherfucker because I'm not going to. So thanks a lot, Gary. So I have to contact Alan Moore, and I was not of the opinion that Alan was exactly crazy. I knew he was distant, but I got in touch with him and I said, here's the deal. We got somebody else wants to reprint Pictopia. I think they'll do a really good job because they did a good job 25 years ago. And So I heard back through this third party. Alan's fine with the reprint. And his, by the way, and I should mention this, he never took a royalty on any of these anthologies. He would just say, let the artist divide it up. And it wasn't a great pot of money, I can tell you. A few $100, you know, maybe I think I got 800 from the 2015. I gave, you know, I parceled out some of it to my collaborators, but this is not like you could buy a yacht or something. It wasn't like Image money in the early 90s. So he said, Alan's fine with the deal. Go ahead. He doesn't want any royalties, but he wants to take his name off it. And I thought, oh, geez. And so this ensued a correspondence. What is the problem? And there was some, and then the next response I got was, I said, what if we credit Byron Starkwinter with the script? And Byron Starkwinter is from the other document that you got, which Alan completely forgot writing. Alan had, after In Pictopia in 1986-87, he had written a plot for something called Convention Tension, which was a kind of the counterpart to In Pictopia. In Pictopia takes place among the fictional characters. So you've got Blondie and Mandrake the magician, and you've got the superheroes, and you've got the funny animals. But Convention Tension was all about the creators. They all go to a convention, and it's this kind of hotel on the edge of forever, and they're all, you know, there's like a Jack Kirby character, and there's a Stan Lee character, and there's a Steve Gerber Mookie. There's a Steve Gerber character. Now, again, I mentioned Howard the Duck. I don't know if I mentioned Howard the Duck. That was a real big thing in the 70s. And the fact that Gerber, yeah, I mentioned that he had not secured the rights. So in Convention Tension, Alan has a character called Byron Starkwinter, who is pretty clearly a Steve Gerber satire. And Byron Starkwinter has some substance abuse problems. All the fame has gone to his head. He's created a character called Mookie the Worm. And this is all described in the text. Of course, this was never drawn. We never got to it, but the plot exists. And he's, you know, all of these insane things take place at this convention, and Byron goes a little crazy. He got some guns and ammo. He starts hallucinating. He believes that Mookie the Worm, his creation, is a real character. It would have been very fun to draw. But I said, well, we'll just credit this to Byron Starkwinter. Then I got an email back from the third party. He said, well, no, just Alan just wants to be listed as a content provider. Well, now this starts to not make any sense to me, because he wants his name off, but then he wants his name on, but just listed as a content provider. So, you know, me and Gary are just rattling our brains. What is his problem? Does he have a problem with, who does he have a problem with? So I again, we're at this time, I'm scanning the stuff, and we're still getting the stuff together. I try one more time, and I email and I say, look, we got your script. We'd like to run it. We'd like to credit you. This is all a celebration of your accomplishment on this story. To make a long story short, he comes back and he writes me this long email, which is cut and pasted into the third party's email. I just posted this on my blog. It's actually very difficult. There was all kind of weird formatting and stuff. I don't know what it was written in. I had a hard time stripping out the formatting, but he says basically he's still pissed off at Fantagraphics for something that happened in the 90s that had nothing to do with me. And to make a long story short, people can look on the blog, they can read it. it has to do with a transcript. Alan claims that it was a printed issue of the Comics Journal, in which there was an interview with Steve Bissette. Steve has nobody can find this, right? Steve has told me that it was a transcript of an interview. He had sent it to Alan. Alan objected to something, and he removed it from the published version. But then Alan goes on to claim that Fantagraphics wrote multiple editorials criticizing him for taking image money or something. But anyway, all of this is a reality for Alan. Nobody can verify it, but he just wants his name off it. He doesn't want to be associated with Fantagraphics. From my point of view, I mean, it's obviously none of this had anything to do with me. I'm kind of an innocent party. I've been putting up with these bad reprints all these years. I finally have somebody that I know is going to do a good job. You saw the printed piece. It turned out great. It's the definitive edition, but it's like just my name on the cover with Mike and Pete and Eric Vincent's name. And I knew, people are going to think, well, he must, what has he done? Dave Gibbons screwed Alan Moore, and DC Comics screwed Alan Moore, and Hollywood screwed Alan, and Don Simpson must have done something. He must have done something. And I knew that this was going to happen. But I just said to Gary, look, you got everything. You got to decide whether you can make money. I think this is all just to prove how important Alan Moore's name is. We already knew that. People are going to buy it because there's Alan Moore's name. They're not going to buy it because his name's off it. I don't care anymore. I just don't care. So Gary thought he could still sell a few copies, and they did a really nice job. And the book came out, but there's no script. I told him, I said, look, if we run the script, people will see what a bad job I did interpreting this, I mean, because again, you've seen it. It's like it's like a novel. It's like a 28-page script for an 8-page story, and I turned it into 13 pages because there was just too much material. But I said, people will, and everybody who's seen it, I scanned it, I sent a PDF to different scholars and so on. They're just blown away by this thing. And it's, I'm sure you're going to be showing some images of it, but it's on a typewriter, and the typewriter's not aligned. It looks like a Psycho ransom note or something. But yeah, I kind of held my tongue, hoping for the best. And the book's been out now for close to a year, I guess. And I just decided I'm not gonna be quiet about it anymore. So completely unrelated is the 1963 project, which I've decided to finish on my own. And I've been talking to Steve Bissette about doing this for years. Why don't you guys finish this thing? And I only know Steve's side of the story, but apparently this was another Alan Moore. He's upset with somebody. He's taking it out. What I find interesting is that he's taking this out on his own creator-owned things. I'm not sure that this is going to bring Hollywood to its knees, or get back at DC Comics for whatever he's upset about. But anyway, you want to talk about what else you want to talk about?
Well, taking it out on the fans that also would like to see a completed project who did nothing to him, so well,
not only the fans, but retailers. I mean, people had some actual cash in this thing, right? 1963. Now we're talking about 1963 now.
Right.
Pictopia was just for fun. I mean, that was just, nobody expected to get money. I didn't expect to get paid. We were doing it for free. It was just a benefit book. Anything Goes was a benefit series for Fantagraphics, but 1963 was Image, right? So Image was selling 2 million copies of Wildcats and 2 million of Spawn. People were going insane. Now, you were 5 years old, but the generation just a few years before you, they were there was a kind of a father-son dynamic, like all the 60s, 70s fans. They now had kids. They were enjoying this sensation of Image Comics. And Alan had been out of comics for a while. Steve Bissett and Rick Veitch wanted to bring Alan back in. All three of them had worked on Swamp Thing. And so they concocted this thing called 1963, and those were the three that owned it: Alan, Rick Veitch, Steve Bissett. And they pitched it to Valentino. I don't know how that came about. Come to think of it, I'm not sure how I got involved in Image Comics. I was doing Splitting Image at the time. I was doing Savage Dragon. It's kind of a miraculous. I've actually told those stories elsewhere, but I was already doing a couple things for Image. But and I knew Jim from the old days, Jim Valentino. But how they came up with 1963, I'm really not sure, and I didn't own it or anything. I was not participating in the copyright, but I ended up lettering it. I told this story last week. Jim, we're all out in San Diego. The Image panel's going on. I don't know if you've ever been to a San Diego convention.
Impossible to get tickets.
They're like these. This was just as they were becoming this huge media thing, but they were still rather homemade at that point. Less than a million people, or how many people they get now. This was still the good old days. But the Image panel's going on. Valentino says to me, go find Rick and Steve. I want to announce this. And so I'm running errands for Jim Valentino. I run down to the trade room, the dealer's room. I find Rick and Steve. Hey, they want you up at the Image panel. So we go up to the Image panel, and they announce Alan Moore's coming back to comics, and Image has got him, and there was a palpable excitement. And on top of the Image phenomenon itself, there was a gasp in the room. Alan Moore's coming back, and all this stuff. So everybody was quite excited. There was 6 issues, and it was they were all patterned on the 60s Marvel comics. You had a kind of Fantastic Four, you had the Avengers, you had these weird double books that Marvel used to do that had like Strange Tales had Nick Fury and Doctor Strange. They, two features per issue. So there were those kind of books. And initially, I was the letterer of. My lettering appeared in 4 of them, and I did the house ad. I did the 63 logo. Mm-hmm. And then and then Rick got fed up with me, and I got fired because I went to a convention instead of making my deadlines, which weren't my problem anyway. But yeah, this thing was never finished, and you say the fans were expecting an ending, but dealers were buying this thing by the case. They were buying all those Image comics. They were buying hundreds of copies because they were all going to be worth a lot of money. Mm-hmm. And you go around to shows now, you get dollar bins. All those hot comics are, all those stuff were printed, way. The print runs far exceeded the actual readership of people that would actually read them. Mm-hmm. But people were spending real money, and retailers were spending huge amounts of money on this series. And the idea was that it would be finished. It would be finished with this annual. So 6 regular comic books, and they were on newsprint. Image Comics in those days had pioneered computer coloring and nice paper, all that stuff. But Image Comics was intentionally this throwback to newsprint and to flat coloring, the old school method. and it was going to all wrap up after the 6 issues. They were all independent titles, Mystery Incorporated and The Fury and Horus and all this stuff. And then there was going to be this annual to finish them all off, and it was going to team up. They were going to be a crossover with the Image characters, Young Blood and Wildcats and all this stuff. Well, I'm out of it by this point, so I only know from hearsay what transpired. But there was, needless to say, there was never any ending to this story. And I've talked to Steve Bissette over the years, and he has the rights to N-Man, which is one of the characters. He has the rights to the Fury. And I actually drew an N-Man story for Steve for his collection, which is unpublished at this point. But he still owns the rights to his characters. And he's told me why this thing hasn't happened. And they almost had a collection. They didn't have a collection. And Alan almost signed an agreement, but then he didn't sign an agreement. And I've said to Steve over the years, why don't you finish this thing? You know, this is not, I've argued this before. It's not Hollywood that's preventing this. This is not DC Comics. It's not corporate lawyers that is preventing this. This is just ego bullshit that is preventing this. I guess Jim Lee was supposed to draw it. He never drew it. You could get somebody else, get anybody else. But collect this thing, finish the annual. And this is now, next year will be 30 years.
Yeah, that's crazy.
2023. So I can show you something, but I'll restrain myself. But I just decided, and I don't know how this there was from time to time I get these emails from Steve, and he updated me on somebody's compiling a dossier on how Alan Moore has mistreated all of his collaborators over the years. So I got this email in 2022, this year, and that just set it off for me. And I've been doing, as I said, as we were warming up here, I've been doing a lot of commissions and working a lot at home. I'm only teaching one class this semester. I have more time for the drawing board. And so I just decided I was going to start drawing my own annual. And it was one of those things where I've been talking about it for so long to Steve. Somebody should draw this annual. Just draw the annual. And now, so I drew a cover and I posted it. And Steve shared it. And he said he'd never laughed so hard in his life. Because it's partially, now this is not the story that they would have done back in 1993. I have no idea what they would have done in 1993. Now I understand there's a plot in the files of Jim Valentino. He hasn't shared this with anybody, but I'm gonna reach for my coffee here. So I'm just what I'm doing is I'm like this. There's an N-Man character, but he's not N-Man. He's the Cyclopster. He's a Cyclops and a lobster. And I just inked I just lettered his big page here. So it's Cyclopster in time. And I have my Fury character is just called the Black Bug. So I'm ready to ink that page. So I just shot my mouth off once too often. I decided, well, I might as well go ahead and draw the whole annual. I don't know what it's going to run. I've got now I have a couple pages inked. I have right now it's at 20 pages, and I have no deadline. I have no publisher lined up, but I'm calling it 1963 When Else, which is a reference to John Byrne, Else When, right? Which I think is a very interesting project, just technically and legally. I think is an interesting project that John Byrne is finishing up a story from 100 years ago,
Yeah.
He doesn't have permission. He's not working with editors. He's just go ahead and doing it. And I'm doing the same thing. But I'm parodying all the characters. And you have to remember that 1963 originally was obviously it was a parody of Marvel, right?
Mm-hmm.
So instead of the Fantastic Four and Spider-Man, you had surrogate characters. So all I'm doing is the same thing. I'm just making surrogate characters in place of the ones that Rick and Steve own, because I'm too cheap to license them. I don't know what that would run anyway.
I mean,
so yeah, I'm that's what I'm doing.
and so there is a plan to actually get it published though, when you're done?
There is not a plan, but there is something is emerging. I'm getting a lot of hits. People are like emailing me. Somebody just emailed me and said, I don't want, because I'm actually posting. I have pages that are penciled, partially inked. Here's a page, and I'm actually posting everything. I'm posting, like, this is just lettering and panels, and it's not even inked lettering. What else do I got here? That's not the right one. Where are they? But I'm posting things. So I'm posting boxes with penciled lettering, and then I'm posting then I'm inking the lettering. I'm actually lettering it, and then I'm posting that, and then I'm penciling something. So it's like there's 3 or 4 different states, right? Until the final ink job. So this page, for example, this is inked, but I think I posted originally, it was just lettering, and then it was just blue pencil. And every time I post it, people are like, I can't believe this is fantastic. Are you going to do this? I'm like, yeah, I guess, and I'm working on the John Byrne model. So hopefully I'll sell the artwork. I've gotten a few bids already. And I've only got 2 finished ink pieces, but I'm hoping that as I keep posting it, people will continue being interested in it, and I can sell the artwork. That's the John Byrne model. Apparently, he's just selling he's doing this X-Men. He's doing this unofficial X-Men story, and he's just selling the artwork. I'm not a crowdfunder. I've never done a crowdfunding thing. I don't like the idea of crowdfunding, mostly because I don't want to have to mail off a million different autographed things. It's just, that's a pretty big promise to make. So right now I'm just producing it. I've been selling artwork. I've been selling commissions. If you want to support, Don Simpson's 1963 satire and blatant attack on Alan Moore, you can buy some artwork from me. You can buy a commission from me. I'm selling old stuff. I'm selling new stuff. So like I said, I had a really good January, which is now coming to an end. I did a lot of commissions, and I sold a lot of vintage artwork. So hopefully that will continue in 2022, and I will keep drawing. I promise you, I will keep drawing. I don't know when my deadline will be, but that's as far as a publishing plan as I have right at the moment.
All right. Well, I definitely want to see that in print. I look forward to every page that you keep posting on Facebook. It's exciting to see. It's fun to see. I just think it's interesting too, because like you started doing this, and there is a group that I'm a part of on Facebook, and they did license Steve Bissett's characters, and they're going to publish their 1960. I think it's giant size 1963 is what they're going to call it. So it's interesting to see all this kind of coming back, and like you said, it's almost 30 years. And
well, I kind of had that idea too, and I suggested this to Steve maybe a year and a half ago, but we should just we should do because I just said draw the annual. We just need to draw the annual, but we could use N-Man and the Fury, and we'll just parody the other characters. And I guess that's kind of what these guys are doing now. They're gonna license the Fury, and I don't know, is the Hypernaut, is that a Bissett character?
I feel like Hypernaut is going to be in it. Yes.
And N-Man, but then everything else is going to be an avatar, a simulacrum of the like U.S. agent, all the Rick Beach characters and stuff. So that's fine. You know, I think everybody should everybody should do a 1963 annual. I think mine is the only one that will have my lettering. So you know, I actually did a new 63 logo for it, but yeah, I think everybody should do a 1963 annual, because that's what we're up to. We're all kind of finishing this story in our minds. That we have no choice, because it doesn't look like it's ever going to happen otherwise. So that's fine.
And then besides teaching, besides you know, the commission stuff, any other things in the works?
Well, I'm writing a prose chapter every week. I've been doing this for 2 years now, 3 years now. I've been writing the Megaton Man maxi series, and I thought I was going to be the next J.K. Rowling. I thought I'd get a book deal right away. It's just kind of dragged on, but I have just done. I think we're up to 153 consecutive weeks, and I'm proceeding chronologically on that. I basically started back before the first issue of Megaton Man, and now we're up to which would have been. I had to work out a timeline. I had to work out timelines and family trees and histories and so forth, because when I did those comics in the 80s, I was just making it up as I went along, much like I do comics today. But I figured out that the first issue of Megaton Man took place in 1980. It was actually published at the end of 1984. But I figured out this timeline. So we're up to about 1985, which is a year before Yarn Man #1, if you know my sequence of comics. So it's and it's all told from the point of view of Ms. Megaton Man, or Clarissa James, who's an African-American woman. She was a character in the original series, and she's just kind of a roommate character. She's just kind of a pedestrian civilian character, and she's kind of a friend of Stella's. And eventually she has a fling with the Yarn Man. She gets her own mega powers, and so she's a mega hero. And one of the things that I realized, that I went back and read my old comics, was that there's just huge gaps of time where I never really talk about what she's up to. And so I've been doing that in prose. As I said, I thought I was the next J.K. Rowling, but it's more like just fan fiction. I'm just doing fan fiction of my own characters, but it's been very interesting to me. You'd think that writing, and I have Alan Moore to inspire me, that you saw that script. You'd think that writing by itself would be easier, you know, not having to draw. But it's actually it's a very tricky. I don't know if you've ever tried writing prose, but it's when I'm drawing something, and I'm drawing, you know, I draw stuff and then I put a word balloon on it and I ad lib and so forth. That I know how to tell a story with pictures, because the pictures are kind of pacing the story. But when you're just writing words, it's a whole different ball game. So it's an interesting lesson in the difference between prose and a visual medium. So I really like writing. I really like not getting all covered in ink. uh, this is so time consuming. This is just massively time consuming, but it's what the fans will pay for in terms of buying original artwork and commissions they want me to draw. And so that's fine. But I really like writing and getting inside the characters psychologically, and so I find this to be a fairly good balance right at the moment.
And then any plans on like Megaton Man? Obviously, like there's no collections that are currently in print, but is there any plans, or have you thought about maybe putting some of that stuff back in print?
Not with my money. And again, I'm not a crowdfunder, right? So there's been some talk. I have an agent. It's actually my first publisher, Dennis Kitchen. He's pitched it to a few publishers. He says he's talking to somebody else now. Print, I don't understand print. I published my own comics in the 90s, Bizarre Heroes, and that was I made a pile of money with my image projects, which I had mentioned. I ended up frittering that away on a computer and on printing my own series. But it's nice. I go to shows and I meet fans, and I have collectors and people that want sketches and artwork. It's nice to have something new. I haven't had copies of In Pictopia for shows because I didn't get it. I'm still waiting for some copies from Fantagraphics. They had a mix-up, but anyway, it's nice to have something new. You can sell it for $10, $20, whatever. I had a Border Worlds collection a few years back, but mostly what I'm doing is sketches and commissions, and that's just a bigger cash transaction. That seems to be where my market is right now. I'm not sure, unless I got a real, got a movie deal tied in with a real hot company or something. I'm not sure how I would make a mass-produced print project work right at the moment. Now that could change, we'll see, but I don't have any plans to necessarily print anything on my own. Now I do have coming up in a couple months, maybe at the end of February, if you come to see me at the Great Lakes Comic-Con, we might have Victory Folks come out, which is a thing that I penciled about a year ago, and it's being colored right now. Bill Loebs is the writer, Jason Moore is the inker, and it's a 20-page story with some pinups, and it's a bunch of golden age public domain characters. And I just started penciling this. This is a benefit. It's a benefit for Bill Loebs, who does not have the luxury of Alan Moore to turn down movie deals and so forth. But Bill's always had a kind of financial struggle, so we're doing it for his financial gain. Him and his wife Nadine have been friends of mine for a long time, so we're hoping to see this book out. Well, it's definitely coming out this spring, hopefully the end of February. So that's maybe the major project that I have pending right now.
Okay, will people that aren't going to the con be able to pick up a copy, or is it only going to be distributed through the con?
Well, it's up to the, I suppose the U.S. mail. Yeah. Yeet Presents is the publisher, and they're quite active on social media, so they sell a lot of issues. The publisher, Mike Jones, has been doing a lot of stuff. They've been getting a lot of Bill Loeb's back issues and graded and slabbed, and they're selling those on eBay and stuff like that. So he has a lot of revenue streams. But he's Yeet Presents is up to what I think issue 50. It might be the 50th issue that they're putting this in. I don't know about that. I'm not worried about that. That's as long as I get a few copies, that'll be great. But yeah, look forward to that in the spring, and you will be able to buy it online.
Okay.
Use your Bitcoins and stuff, your NFTs. Your NFTs and all that.
Yeah. All right, man. Well, dude, thank you so much for taking time to chat with me, sharing some artwork with me. I can't wait to continue to see the progress with this 1963 annual you're drawing.
Well, that's Ms. Megaton Man illustration. So yeah, I'll get back to drawing, and you got to go pick your daughter up from school eventually. So good talking to you, Ryan.
Yeah, dude, I had a blast chatting with you, and
Let me know when this hits the airwaves.
I will, and I'd definitely love to do this with you again sometime if you're ever up for it.
Sure.
Awesome,
Sure thing.
man. All right, man. Well, thank
All
you.
right, take care.